Hello music fans, welcome to the Death by Unicorn channel and to my show called What's New 2023, where I talk about new album releases in the metal, rock, and prog genres, and I talk about them in my order of preference, starting with my favorite from the past week, which is the Anchoret and their album It All Began With Loneliness. This is progressive metal, and it's a Canadian band, and it's a debut album. In fact, two of the albums, the first two that I'm going to talk about, are both debut albums, and it's really great to hear strong debut albums from new bands. Gotta love fellow Canadians, especially if they're prog metal people. There's great lead and rhythm guitar playing on this album, great compositions by the Anchoret. They do mostly clean vocals, but also some harsh vocals, so you got to be ready for that. But they're not too harsh. I think could be a good gateway band into more harsh progressive metal for people that tend to avoid that. I think there's still a lot here that you could like, because a lot of it's clean. There's a lot of jazz influences on here too, as well as of course there's metal as well. If you're a fan of bands like Protest the Hero, Haken, and Opeth, it's kind of like a mix of those bands without sounding too much like any of them. I don't hear anything that's like ripping off anything else. But if you take the guitar wizardry of Protest the Hero, the compositional strength of Haken, and the dynamic range of Opeth, smash them together with some jazz fusion, this is kind of like what you'd get from that. It's definitely my top 5 debut albums of the year so far, along with the likes of other great debut albums like Anchoret, Tritop, Enoch Root, and Einar Solberg. I'll probably do a video on my top 10 debut albums of the year at the end of the year, so stay tuned for that if you're interested in hearing about great new up-and-coming artists. This is also even just a strong contender for my year-end top 40 albums of the year in general, and that's saying a lot because I listen to a lot of music. I'm already at over 200 albums listened to this year, and I specifically seek out things that I think will be great. Next up, I'll talk about High Priest and their album Invocation. This is stoner doom metal with hard rock, blues, and southern rock influences. It's another debut album. This is an American band, and just another great debut. I heard and really enjoyed the single called Divinity ahead of album release time, and I think people who like He Is Legend, Queens of the Stone Age, Alice in Chains, and Black Sabbath will like this. It sounds like a combination of those bands. I don't usually listen to or love much stoner doom metal, but this is just excellent, and it makes me wonder if there could be a bunch more releases in that genre that I would love. So check out High Priest and their album Invocation if that sounds good to you. Next up on my list, another one that came out on June 23rd. In fact, all of these came out on Friday, June 23rd. It's Pyramaze and their album Bloodlines. This is power metal. It's got some progressive influences to it. It's the 7th album by this Danish band. And if you like Stradivarius, Hammerfall, Evergrey, bands like that, I think you'll like this. So far it's in my top 4 power metal albums of the year, along with Redemption, Twilight Force, and Frozen Crown. Power metal is not usually my main genre either, but when they sprinkle in a little bit of progressive nature in the song structures, and they have really good guitar shredding and fun, catchy vocal melodies, I can't deny an amazing power metal album. Next I want to talk about a weird one. It's by the band Swans, and it's called The Beggar. This is hard to describe genre-wise, but kind of experimental post-rock. It's got a lot of just like weird noises, that post-punk vibes to it, a lot of industrial and some neo-folk influences. It's the 16th album by this band. They are weird as hell, so I figured I'd explore their music a bit. The vocals sound like Lou Reed on his Lulu collaboration with Metallica, which is not a good thing from my perspective, unfortunately, but I'm sure it's what they're going for. First two songs I found were both way too long, and I think both of them only had like one chord the whole time, and they're both like 8-minute long songs. They just kind of drone on it and have a lot of like weird production. The song is basically like the vocals and the lyrics, and then the production, it's not so much like the music and the harmony. So you have to be ready to pay attention to that kind of stuff. I was pretty happy to hear the third song had 2 chords instead of just one, and that it was under 4 minutes instead of being really long. So that was a welcome change, but still a little uninteresting musically and harmonically. At least they use interesting chords when they do the 2-chord songs. It's not like pop chords, like they have, diminished chords and augmented chord vamps and stuff like that you don't typically hear in pop songs. And they use different scales rather than just major and minor for kind of the melodic playing and stuff. It sounds kind of like just jammy and drony. Another big question I have is just, why is this album over 2 hours long? It shouldn't be that long. There's no good reason for an album to be that long unless it's like maybe a concept album that's telling a really long, complex story. Maybe that's what this is. I didn't pay too close attention to the lyrics. And I can handle weird stuff like Mr. Bungle, Black Midi, HMLTD's The Worm from this year, and other experimental stuff like this. This is similar to those in that experimental rock style, but I just found this is way too out there. It's out there, but also kind of one note and boring at the same time somehow. It had some neo-folk vibes to it from time to time, which was interesting, kind of like Heilung and Wardruna, but it wasn't as enjoyable to me as either of those. The song called The Beggar Lover 3 is a 44-minute song, and that one was pretty cool because it was kind of like a journey. I could see this being like soundtrack cinematic music in like a creepy like horror movie or TV show or something like that. I could see why people would like this band, but for me it was just too weird and monotonous and drony and creepy. Like for me it was kind of more focused on noise and production than music, which is not really my thing. And that's a good segue into the next album that I'm going to talk about. Is it's kind of a similar thing with a focus on production, and that's an album from the band Jegong. I don't know how to pronounce it. Jegong. Sorry, tired guys. And the album's called The Complex Inbetween. This is also kind of post-rock, but it's instrumental and also experimental with some psychedelic vibes, electronic aspects to it, some metal and krautrock all thrown in there. It's the second album by this band from Switzerland. They're signed to Pelagic Records, and that's kind of what made me check this out, because that's the record label helmed by members of the great progressive post-metal band The Ocean. So that got me really interested in hearing Jegong, because I love The Ocean. I also love Hypnos, who is also signed to that label. Both of their albums, The Ocean and Hypnos, are likely in my top 10 of the year at the moment. But while this album has some similarities to those bands with the atmosphere and the focus on production and getting a hypnotic effect with their music, the music is very different. It's more electronic than it is metal. It's very drony as well like the last album from Swans I was talking about. I didn't find the instrumental parts to be interesting enough for this to warrant being an album without vocals. I think this is for people who are fans of interesting production sounds and tricks, which again isn't my main area of interest. I did hear a lot of cool sounds on this, but I'm a lot more interested to hear interesting musical compositions. Their compositions were okay, but a lot didn't justify their length to me or have enough captivating moments to stand alone as instrumentals for me. And that's it for 5 albums that I heard that came out on June 23rd. Hope something on this list sounds interesting to you. Let me know what you think of these albums down in the comments, or if I missed any that came out recently that you think I'd enjoy. Let me know what I'm missing with Swans and Jegong and why they're totally amazing and why I just don't get it. Maybe there's something there that could click for me if I revisit them, but I'm not excited to revisit either of those. I'll definitely be revisiting the first 3 that I talked about today from the Anchoret, High Priest, and Pyramaze. And stay tuned for my next episode of this in about a week. Until next time, peace out.